Hey guys, the purpose of this video is to help you understand the roots of the Vietnam conflict and what brought about our involvement in Vietnam, and then that'll build the bridge for us to understand how our involvement shaped Vietnam and also developments in America. So, this is Vietnam, roots of the conflict. You're going to be learning who the opposing sides were in the Vietnam conflict, who was fighting who, basically, what motivated the United States to get involved in Vietnam, what event gave the president the power to use unlimited force in Vietnam, and why do some think that America acted unethically during this time period. The first thing you need to know, and oh, by the way, this video goes with a handout, a note sheet on roots of the Vietnam conflict, so you'll be filling that out as you go. The first thing you need to know is the French colonized. Oh, the other thing I need to tell you is that the PowerPoint doesn't exactly go like fill in note style with the sheet. You actually have to think. You have to listen to the video, and then you have to look at your sheet and figure out what the answer there should be. Okay, so it doesn't go in lockstep, perfect order, or whatever. But it's entirely doable. Just listen up. All right. So the first thing you need to know is that the French colonized Vietnam during the imperialist era. So the late 1800s, actually earlier than that. And from the 1800s until World War II, France controlled Vietnam. And then at the end of World War I, Ho Chi Minh led a group opposed to French rule, and they wanted independence for Vietnam and self-determination. Okay, his followers were called the Viet Minh, and they were the ones who wanted to follow Ho Chi Minh's call for independence. Unfortunately for them, they were communists, and so that was part of what also led the French and Americans and other forces to not necessarily be that sympathetic with Ho Chi Minh and his followers, because we were already wary of communism and found it suspect. Well, during World War II, the Japanese occupied Vietnam, and the United States supported Ho Chi Minh because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so both Ho Chi Minh and us were the enemies of Japan. And so we actually gave aid to Ho Chi Minh and helped support him fighting against Japanese aggression. The Viet Minh hoped that through this working relationship, that after Japan was defeated, that they would become independent. However, the French do not intend to give them their independence, and they come back and try and impose their rule on the country. So, after World War II and the Allies winning World War II, the French returned in 1946 to retake Vietnam, and Ho Chi Minh's supporters had no intention of letting them do so. We supported France. This was during the Truman administration. We supported France with money and weapons because we didn't want to see the spread of communism. If you remember, the Truman Doctrine said that we would fight the expansion of communism worldwide, and Ho Chi Minh was a communist, so therefore we did not want to see the French fail. Our U.S. position was based on this assumption called the domino theory. The domino theory basically said that if one country, it was a belief that if one country in Southeast Asia fell to communism, they would all fall, just like dominoes, that when the first one fell, then they would quickly fall in quick succession after that. And therefore we had to prevent that first domino from falling, and that would be Vietnam. Well, the French are defeated despite the fact that we give them aid. The French are not able to defeat the Viet Minh. Their final battle was called the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, and it was after that time period that the French realized that Dien Bien Phu was up here. It was at that time that the French realized that they just weren't willing to put forth more resources and men to bring about Vietnam's control. So, all the countries that are involved in this area, as well as the United States and France and Britain and the USSR, and the US and China and Laos and Cambodia, they all meet with the Viet Minh to determine what kind of peace agreement can come about now that the French are willing to get out of Vietnam. And so what they agree to do, we have capitalists and people in the South who don't want communism, and then we have the Viet Minh who are stronger in the North. What they decide is a peace treaty called the Geneva Accords. And the Geneva Accords say that they're going to temporarily divide the country here at the 17th parallel. And then the North is going to be communist and the South will be anti-communist. And that they would both consolidate control, rebuild their country, bring about peace. And then in 2 years, they would hold elections that would unify the country again under a single government. So this is kind of setting up, this is kind of, hopefully you think by now they're finally getting this. They divided Germany, and the idea was to unify it, and it was never unified. And then they divided Korea, and the whole goal was to unify it, and they never unified it. And here they are yet again with this division of a country, and then saying later they'll unify it. So you probably have a sense of how this is actually going to go. What happens is that the communists are very popular with the rural people. He believes in splitting up the land and redistributing it to the peasants and kind of getting away from the kind of feudal control of many by the few that had existed in Vietnam previously. So the South and us become increasingly afraid that they're going to lose the 1956 elections. And so as a result, those elections were never held because the South refuses to participate. So again, we're kind of having to pick here between democracy or capitalism in Vietnam, and we picked clearly capitalism because we avoided these elections and really kind of trampled on democracy because we had a sense that the communists would win out. The leader of South Vietnam is named No Diem, and he's a Catholic, Western educated, has a Western educated wife, and so we like him an awful lot, but he does have a liability. The problem is that he's a Catholic, and he does not like Buddhism within his country, and there's a good number of people who are Buddhist. We supported him, though, because he was anti-communist, and so this is another case of where we're kind of propping up a corrupt leader simply because he's the strongest force for anti-communism in the area. You can see that here, this is a man who has set himself on fire. One way in which Buddhists got attention for their cause against Diem was to do these self-immolation protests where they would set themselves on fire and obviously die as a result of that. And that gave a lot of people their first exposure to Vietnam. This was shown on TV on the evening news. And a lot of Americans were like, oh my gosh, what's the matter with these people? And what terrible person is making them so upset that they would set themselves on fire? And we found out that that man was Diem and that we were supporting Diem. So the first impression some people got of Vietnam was one that was less than savory, I guess we would say. The communist sympathizers in the South form, and they're called the Vietcong. They are insurgents, which means that they do not wear uniforms, and they don't use conventional tactics. They kind of use hit-and-run tactics and sneak attacks. Kind of guerrilla fighting, actually, because they're just outgunned and outmanned by the South Vietnamese army, which is supplied and aided by the United States. So that becomes the enemy within South Vietnam, the VC, the Vietcong. The initials are Victor Charles in Army code, so also they become known as Victor Charles, Charlie, VC. All of those are the different names for the enemy within South Vietnam. In 1963, we decided that No Diem had become so much of a liability that we no longer could support him, and so we did nothing to stop a coup, which resulted in the assassination of No Diem. And so from that point forward, we're kind of propping up leaders in South Vietnam, and we really do kind of own the problem of South Vietnam and their government. That same month, Kennedy was assassinated, and LBJ inherited the war. Nobody really questioned Kennedy's Cold War credentials and the idea that he did not like communism, but some people thought LBJ's were a little bit suspect. He didn't have the same Cold War credentials as Kennedy. So Johnson really wants to appear tough on communism, and he wanted to continue to have a presence in Vietnam, but he needed a justification for this. So there's going to be an incident that is widely covered by the Johnson administration. It's called the Gulf of Tonkin incident, or the Tonkin Gulf incident. In August of 1964, Johnson announced that the North had attacked one of our ships in the Gulf of Tonkin, right up here. And he asked Congress, and Congress gave him power to take all necessary actions to defend our interests in Vietnam. So you might have heard that we never declare war in Vietnam, and that's true, because as a result of this law being passed, the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, the president had been basically given a blank check by Congress that he could do whatever he wanted to do in Vietnam to fight communism. So there is no declaration of war like the Korean War. So technically it's not a war, though we all know it was. So war is never declared in Vietnam, and Johnson does whatever he wants in Vietnam. What we find out later as a result of the release of some documents from the Defense Department is that The Gulf of Tonkin really might not have happened at all, like they spun it in that time period. It's questionable now whether our ship was really substantively attacked or not, or if it was the whole thing was exaggerated to justify our involvement and escalate the war. Certainly, we have found that the attack on in the Gulf of Tonkin was not nearly as significant as they made it out to be at the time that the Tonkin Gulf Resolution was passed. So some people later are going to look back at this and feel like we were kind of fooled or lied to, and this is going to help that transition of the media from protecting the presidency to now taking kind of a watchdog stance on the presidency. The idea is that once the government is perceived as lying to the press is going to have to be a lot more skeptical of the government. So, the Vietnam War is going to escalate mightily under LBJ as a result of the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. His own Great Society programs and his presidency are going to increasingly be overshadowed by the Vietnam War. And we'll be talking more about how the war develops in class. Okay, so the prop of the day is puzzle pieces. Because this war is really going to become a puzzle for us on several different levels. We really are going to think that we can fight the war like World War II. You know, the Army is always destined to kind of fight the last war instead of the modern war. And we're going to have, it's not going to be very clear. This is a very different war. There's going to be no clear front. We're going to be fighting an insurgency that is not easy to identify. They're going to be using guerrilla tactics. And so all of our kind of typical go-to things that we do to mobilize for war and fight wars is going to kind of be ineffective, and so we're going to have to really puzzle over how to effectively conduct ourselves and win this war, and even define what victory will look like. So I look forward to seeing you in class. Thanks.